All right, we're going to talk about the chapter review for our first test, Chapter 1, Essentials of Geometry. A couple things I want to point out in the review. Periodically throughout the worksheet, it tells you where to look in your notes. Your notes should be your primary resource when you're studying for this test. But I want to point out a few things that hopefully will help you. In this first section, notice that you're going to be naming a lot of points, lines, rays, things like that, the technical part of this. So a couple things. Remember that when you're talking about a plane, generally speaking, you're going to use 3 points. When you're talking about a line, a segment, or a ray, you will use 2 points. Remembering that when you talk about a ray, it's really important that you read it start to finish, because order matters for the ray. For the line and the segment, the order does not matter very much. And on this diagram, a couple things I want to point out. We have these letters that are not 5 points. I like to call them floaters. They can just be used as nicknames for your line or plane. When using these letters, that's the only time when you don't have to use 2 points or 3 points accordingly. In the next section, I want to point out now you're going to look at lessons 1.2 and 1.3. You're going to talk about congruence. The one thing I want you to remember is that you always need to read the directions so that you get all of the information. You also need to read the diagram. So for example, in question 14, they give you these tick marks right here, and as soon as you see those tick marks, you know that those 2 parts are congruent. So you can set up your equation with an equal sign. So make sure that you are reading the diagram, or you read the words in the direction. For question 17 and 18, they tell you that that is a midpoint. So without tick marks, they're telling you that it also is congruent. On page 2, we're going back to lesson 1.2, and we're going to talk about segment addition. Notice that these diagrams are different because there are no tick marks, there is no use of the word midpoint or bisect. There's nothing that's equal about them, but we do have the whole segment as 56, and we have these 2 parts right here that should add up to 56. So we can find out what the leftovers are. When you get to question 23, make sure that you draw a picture before you set up the problem. You want to make sure that everything is in the right order. For questions 24 through 27, we're going back to lesson 1.3. We're going to be doing the midpoint formula and the distance formula. Remember, the midpoint formula is the average of 2 numbers where you add them up and divide by 2. And the distance formula is the one with the square root, and that's where you do x minus x, quantity squared, plus y minus y, quantity squared, and we can do both of these on the graph. So question number 24, it says find the midpoint of PR using the graph and the midpoint formula. Remember, when we're doing these problems, we can take and draw the triangle in there. We can count these 2 spaces, find the middle of that, and then we can count the middle of these spaces and find the middle of that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we can find the middle of that, which is right here. And then we always read that point from the origin, so we count over and up to calculate what that point is so that we can get x and y. If we're using our formula, remember we add the 2 x numbers, -2 plus 4 and then divide that by 2. X's are the first numbers. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And then we do the y numbers. Those are the second numbers. 5 plus 3, divide that by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. And if you look at that graph, the midpoint should be at 1, 4. When we do the distance formula, we do basically the same kind of idea. We make that same triangle, but instead of finding the middle, we count the lengths. So our first point is at -2, -3, down here at L. Our next point T is at 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, up 3, 1, 2, 3. Again, draw that segment, make this triangle right here. Instead of counting the middle, you're just going to count the spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And those are my x minus x number and my y minus y number. So I can do 6 squared plus 6 squared and take the square root of that, finishing the rest on my calculator. On page 3, we move on to angles. Noticing now that we're moving on to lesson 1.4. All of these angle problems have a little bit different information given to them. So we need to explain our reasoning to make sure that we have good understanding. Again, always reading the problem or reading the diagram. In question 28, they say that the measure of ABC is 123. From A to B to C, I know all of this is 123 degrees. So in this problem, you will use angle addition, adding the two parts and equaling it up to 123. In question 29, they talk about an angle bisector, which means you will make 2 equal parts. In question 23, they put the little box in the corner telling you that you have complementary angles, or 90 degrees, with some more angle angle addition. And question 31, they also say that AB bisects CAD. So again, we're making 2 congruent parts. Make sure that you read the diagram and the words for the problem. Then the last page, I have a couple things from lesson 1.5 that I wanted to point out. Complementary angles and supplementary angles. Remember, they may use the word complement or supplement. They both mean the same, they both are comparable words. When you hear the word complementary, you're thinking 90 degrees, and when you hear the word supplementary, you're thinking of 180 degrees. You're simply looking for the remainder of the angle to add up to 90 or 180. So for question number 37, to find the complement of angle 1, you will do 90 minus 35. And that is the answer that goes on that blank. For question 41, now you'll use 180 degrees, 180 minus 135, and that is the angle that will go on that blank. The other words that come up on this page, remember, are adjacent, angles. Those are angles that are next to each other. You have vertical angles. Those are the angles that make a linear, make the X, and they are across from each other. And you also have linear pairs, and those are angles that are next to each other on a straight line. So they can be here and here, or here and here, depending on how the diagram is drawn. They are always the two angles next to each other on a straight line. If you have any questions, talk to your teacher. Good luck on the test.